The Stellar Academy's amphitheater hummed with the pre-lecture chatter of 100 different species. Lyra stood at the entrance, her canvas satchel heavy against her shoulder, scanning the tiered rows for an empty seat. The lecture on quantum navigation theory was mandatory for all first-year cadets, and she was already 3 minutes late. Her eyes found a gap in the third row, right between two Valkyrian students whose crystalline skin refracted the overhead lights into dancing prisms. She moved quickly down the aisle, her boots silent against the polished stone floor. "Excuse me," Lyra said softly, gesturing to the empty space. The Valkyrian on the left turned slowly, their faceted eyes catching the light. For a moment, they simply stared. Then, without a word, they shifted their bulk sideways, closing the gap. The other Valkyrian followed suit. The space vanished. Lyra's throat tightened. She nodded once and moved on. The next available seat was near the back, wedged between a towering Grath whose exoskeleton scraped against both armrests, and a nervous-looking Pin who kept their tentacles wrapped tight around their datapad. Lyra approached with what she hoped was a friendly smile. "May I?" she asked. The Grath's mandibles clicked twice, a sound Lyra had learned meant discomfort or disapproval. The creature shifted away from the empty seat, but then stretched one of their forearms across it, claiming the space as their own. The Pin avoided eye contact entirely. Lyra felt the heat rising in her cheeks. Around her, conversations continued without pause. No one seemed to notice, or perhaps they simply chose not to. Humans had been part of the Galactic Coalition for only 8 standard cycles, barely a heartbeat in cosmic terms. They were still the newcomers, the unknowns, the ones who had clawed their way out of a gravitational well that should have kept them grounded forever. Other species had been gifted spaceflight by benevolent predecessors, or had evolved in low-gravity environments. Humans had simply refused to accept their limitations. That stubbornness, Lyra was learning, made them fascinating to some and frightening to others. She tried 2 more rows. Each time the pattern repeated with small variations. A bag suddenly placed on an empty seat, a tail stretched across the space, or simply a flat refusal disguised as ignorance. By the time she reached the back corner of the hall, Professor Thane's holographic form had materialized at the podium, and the lights were dimming. Lyra swallowed her frustration and prepared to stand for the 2-hour lecture. Then she heard it, a low rumble from the middle section, followed by the scraping of seats. The Krath cubs occupied rows 7 through 9 in their usual cluster. Krath were massive beings even in their youth, broad-shouldered and thick-furred with eyes that glowed amber in dim light. They were warriors by culture, strategists by training, and fiercely protective of their pack bonds. Kor, the largest of the cubs in his cohort, stood first. His fur was a deep slate gray, and a ceremonial braid hung from behind his left ear, marking him as a 3rd-generation Academy legacy. He gathered his materials with deliberate slowness, loud enough that nearby students turned to look. "What are you doing?" hissed Ven, the cub beside him. "Making space," Kor said simply. He stepped into the aisle. One by one, the other cubs followed. Ven, Thela, Rax, and a dozen more. They moved as a unit, padding up 2 rows and spreading out, leaving row 8 completely empty. The movement caused a ripple of confusion through the amphitheater. Even Professor Thane paused mid-sentence, his holographic eyebrows raised. Kor's amber eyes found Lyra in the back corner. He raised one clawed hand and gestured to the empty row with unmistakable intent. Lyra's breath caught. Every eye in the amphitheater was now on her, some curious, some uncomfortable, some openly hostile. The walk to row 8 felt like crossing a battlefield, but she moved anyway. When she reached the row, Kor was waiting at the end. He didn't smile. Krath didn't really have the facial structure for it, but his ears tilted forward in what she'd learned was their equivalent. He shifted slightly, making room for her to pass. "Thank you," Lyra whispered. Kor's response was a low rumble in his chest, barely audible. "We see you." As Lyra settled into her seat, the other cubs began to file back in. But instead of returning to their original formation, they spread out along row 8, on both sides of her, filling the space with their solid, unmistakable presence. Thela sat directly to her left, close enough that Lyra could feel the warmth radiating from her fur. Ven dropped into the seat on her right with enough force to make the bench rattle. "Comfortable?" Ven asked, his tone carrying an edge of challenge, though not directed at her. Yes, Lyra managed. Very. Professor Thane cleared his holographic throat. If we're quite finished with the seating arrangements, perhaps we can discuss the fascinating properties of quantum entanglement in non-Euclidean space. A few nervous laughs scattered through the hall. The lecture resumed, but Lyra barely heard the first 20 minutes. She was too aware of the warmth surrounding her, the subtle shifts of fur and muscle as the cubs settled in, and the overwhelming sense of being shielded, protected, accepted. Halfway through the lecture, when Professor Thane pulled up a particularly complex equation, Lyra leaned slightly toward Kor. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. Kor didn't turn his head, keeping his eyes on the holographic display, but his voice carried clearly to her ears alone. "My grandfather once told me a story. When the Krath were young and struggling, we were barred from the first coalition councils, told we were too aggressive, too dangerous to sit among civilized species." He paused. Then the Varix War came, and suddenly our aggression was useful. Our danger was necessary. We bled for species who wouldn't share a bench with us. Lyra's chest tightened. "Humans fight gravity itself and win," Kor continued. "You don't belong standing in corners." His ear flicked once. "Besides, the pack sits together." That's how we were taught. Lyra found herself blinking rapidly. Around her, the other cubs had leaned in slightly, forming an unconscious circle of solidarity. Thala's tail thumped once against the floor, a gesture of agreement. When the lecture ended, Lyra gathered her things slowly. The cubs waited, making no move to rush past her. As they filed out together, she noticed the stares from other students, some confused, some thoughtful, and a few openly envious. At the doorway, Kor paused. "Same time next week?" Lyra smiled, genuinely this time. "Same time next week." As she walked out into the corridor, surrounded by the gentle rumble of Krath conversation, Lyra realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer just the human cadet trying to find her place. She was part of a pack, and packs didn't leave their own behind.